Good morning. It is 8:55 a.m. on Sunday, February 12th, 2017. I'm Christiana Ellis and I just got up. This is 5 more minutes. It is a Sunday and that means it is time to continue my rewatch of Avatar: The Last Airbender with Season 2, Episode 5, Avatar Day. It's actually second attempt to record this morning. I had a brief technical hiccup the first time and would have resulted in losing a chunk of what I had said. I figured I'd just start over. So we have a similar structure to last week's episode excuse me. So last week we had Aang, Katara, and Sokka, the Aang gang, having sort of a side adventure, something that's interesting but not necessarily something that forwards the A narrative, while we were bookending with Zuko and Iroh continuing their current trajectory. So we continue that structure. We do that again this time. And I think it's actually a hallmark of the genius in the storytelling for this show that they've set up a structure that can work with that. They don't have to move the prime narrative forward for every character in every episode, because we can cut back and forth between the different sets of characters. We have Iroh and Zuko able to carry that narrative weight of changing circumstances for the characters, while at the same time we can also spend a lot of time with the other characters, the protagonists here, Aang, Katara, and Sokka, where they learn a little bit more about the world. They glean some new little bit of wisdom that's going to help them on their overall journey without necessarily needing to change their circumstances in any more fundamental way. Because I don't think, for example, that we have any doubt whatsoever that Aang is going to escape his fate in this Earth Kingdom trial in some way or another. We don't know how, and we wait to see, but I don't think we're worried about something bad actually happening. Whereas for Zuko and Iroh, something bad is in the process of happening. And in fact, we finally see a break here in this episode, a break in a relationship that has been intact and one of the strongest bonds in the show ever since episode 1, and that is between Zuko and Iroh. We saw last week that their current circumstances are not great. They'd been had to resort to begging on the street, something that Zuko feels deeply humiliated by. After all, even before, when they were exiles, they still had a ship. They had soldiers that would follow their orders. They were able to live in relative comfort. Now everybody hates them. And not only are they targets and fugitives, but their own family is calling them traitors. And it's under an environment where anyone who would dare to question the new orders and think, well, but maybe Iroh and Zuko are not so bad, they're just going to get a finger pointed at them saying, well, maybe you're a traitor too. So that's a bad spot for Zuko and Iroh. Everybody hates them. The people who are outside the Fire Nation hate them because they're from the Fire Nation. The people in the Fire Nation hate them because they've been labeled traitors. So, not great. And it's not clear what the next step is. And Iroh has some wisdom that he's attempting to apply with a light touch, that perhaps they don't need to settle on a new path right away. What they need to develop is their own inner resources. As he says in this episode, hope is something that you give yourself. That's the meaning of inner strength. You don't look to external things to give you hope. You find that within yourself. And this was the first step in a while of Iroh trying to be a little bit more direct in his advice to Zuko. For a long time, he's been letting Zuko make his own decisions with only sort of a gentle word of, "Oh, are you sure?" That sort of thing, because he's been hoping to stay in Zuko's life and be this good influence for him, because he sees the potential for a better man in Zuko than really even Zuko does. And we see in this episode that Zuko's humiliation at being forced to beg has made him a thief. Something that I think we see him first stealing just for food. Last time we saw him don the blue spirit mask in order to get revenge on the Earth Kingdom man who humiliated Iroh. Although, arguably, Iroh didn't feel humiliated. So for Zuko to feel humiliated on Iroh's behalf there, it's kind of just doing something for Iroh that Iroh didn't ask for him to do. But what we see here this time is that Zuko starts by stealing food, but then just kind of starts stealing gold, fancy tea sets. And the fancy tea set, I think, is an interesting detail because obviously that's for Iroh. Zuko doesn't care about tea. But Zuko, or rather Iroh, points out good tea tastes good whether it's in a fancy pot or not, or tin cup. Kind of making it clear that that Zuko is not... He makes it clear in a gentle way that Zuko is not allowed to assuage his conscience. He's not allowed to make Iroh part of this as though, well, I did it to do something nice for Iroh. Iroh is making it clear, I didn't ask for this. You did this for you, not for me. But he doesn't say it in an aggressive way because he's been trying to stay in Zuko's life, and he senses that a heavier hand would drive him away. And he is, of course, right, because we see here, even when he applies just a tiny bit much more pressure, it does force Zuko away. Not in an angry way, but in a self-determined way. So I guess what I was getting at earlier is that we can see Zuko indulging in this thievery is very transparently an act of self-loathing. We know that Zuko would not respect someone who lives their life in that way, who lives their life by just stealing things from people. We know that that's not what Zuko respects or what he thinks is good in the world. And so for him doing that to himself, it's basically an act of self-pity. It's like, the world has been so mean to me that it has forced me to do this. And look how awful I'm being. And it's because I've been punished by the world and everything sucks. And I think Iroh sees Zuko doing that and is not sure what he can say, because his advice is to just say, we need to stop thinking of it in terms of the world doing things to us, and the world should stop doing these things to us. We need to be examining our own reactions and finding our own hope within ourselves. But alas, Zuko isn't willing to hear that, and the message he takes from it is, well, then I have to find my own hope within myself by leaving. But I think we can sense, and Iroh can sense too, that's not, he's not taking the message to heart. What he is doing instead is, you're making too much sense, and that forces me to confront emotional realities that I'm not prepared to deal with, and therefore I'm going to leave so I don't have to think about it anymore. And Iroh sees that too, and all he can do at this point is just hope that Zuko is going to be okay in the meantime, and that he will eventually turn things around. And so we see a parting of one of the strongest character bonds in the show since the beginning, and it's moving. I definitely know that when I watched this show the first time, I wasn't as invested in Iroh and Zuko as I am this time through, but I think especially now that I'm rewatching, I'm just seeing how much nuance there is there. Now, I got to that point in the original show too, but I didn't start there. And so seeing all of that built and developed right from the beginning is really a master stroke of storytelling in this show's ledger. But in the meantime, we also have Aang, Katara, and Sokka in their little side adventure, where they come across a town that has a holiday, Avatar Day, and doesn't that sound exciting? And we think that's fun, at least for a moment, and then we learn, it's a we hate the Avatar Day. And because it's 370 years ago, supposedly one of the previous incarnations of the Avatar killed their leader, and now they hate the Avatar, and they celebrate that every year. And it's an interesting quandary for Aang, who doesn't remember the details of this event, to insist that Avatar Kyoshi, his Earth Kingdom incarnation 2 incarnations ago. So Avatar Roku was the one that preceded him directly, and then Kyoshi before that, who we met in the episode last season with Kyoshi Island. And it's nice to have that set of characters return. And I just love the look of the Warriors of Kyoshi makeup and the fans and all of that stuff. It's cool aesthetics to it. But so for Aang, first of all, it's Katara that first intervenes in this celebration where they're trying to burn these giant wooden statues of the Avatar as part of their celebration or their holiday festival. She's the one that intervenes first, but Aang is right there behind her. It's one thing to say, well, there's a bravery in, rather than just slinking off and saying, I guess, they don't like us here, maybe we should just leave. There's a bravery in putting yourself out there and saying, no, this couldn't have happened the way you said. I'm here and I'm going to subject myself to your judgment. But there's also kind of a foolhardy quality to it, because as they discover, this town may not play fair in terms of what this trial represents. And you're talking about trying to solve a mystery of something that happened 370 years ago. And there's some interesting elements going on there. There's lots of fun little details in this whole thing. Of course, Sokka's version of the Sherlock Holmes get up, his little dragon bubble pipe and his weird little hat with the magnifying monocle on it is kind of fun. The dynamic of him and Katara uncovering various clues, having her point them out first, and him irritated that he doesn't get to play detective as effectively as he wants when she keeps pointing out the clues before he can say them. And Katara just kind of being irritated that, look, we're both trying to solve the mystery here. Why does someone have to take credit? But this idea that there are bits of evidence that could be still gleaned from things that happened 370 years ago so that you could actually solve this mystery. It's one of those things where it's like in real life, what are you going to do? What can you actually determine from something like that? So the idea that there's these details like, oh, turns out Avatar Kyoshi actually had really big feet because look at these boots. And so therefore that footprint couldn't have possibly been hers. And things like, oh, well, the temple couldn't have been there when this happened. And supposedly she was actually in this other place far away when it all went down. And so therefore it can't be. But what's interesting about the way they do this story is that instead of having it be this pat case where the kids solve a mystery and their proof just stands on its own and Kyoshi is vindicated, I like that it's not that simple. Because they find this evidence that first suggests, well, at the very least, it didn't happen the way the town believes it did. But the town is also just like, they don't care. What they want is a scapegoat, and they just plan to punish Aang regardless. They don't care about the various little bits of evidence, and even if Aang had been able to present them more effectively, it's arguable that that wouldn't have made a difference either. But what I like is, first, the complication that the trial is not fair. And so it's not just a matter of, well, as long as you're right, you will win the day. Because sometimes that's not how it works. But also the reveal that the actual truth is not what the kids thought from their evidence gathering mission. It's more complicated. The evidence is explained in yet a third way than what the kids had concluded. And the result is that Kyoshi actually kind of did do it. It's not in a murder way, but certainly in an accidental death way. But revealing, of course, that this leader wasn't so great in his own right. And the cool detail that Kyoshi Island wasn't even an island at first. And that's how Kyoshi could have been in both of those places at the same time. Is that they weren't two places until Kyoshi separated them. That's kind of cool. But I like that after all of that, we're still in a position where the town is saying, well, we don't care about all the extra complications that Kyoshi reveals when she shows up. We're still, that means you confessed, therefore we're going to punish you. I like that element, the unfairness of that, just because it's more interesting in a storytelling sense. Also, let me briefly just touch base back with Kyoshi showing up, because I like the detail of Aang putting on the various garments to resemble Kyoshi, unable to kind of completely take it seriously, but also that it's Katara's idea that maybe wearing the stuff will help Aang to be in touch with his previous incarnation, and Sokka's sage nod of like, well, I do appreciate the value of stuff, and he's got wearing his little detective hat and monocle and so on. That's fun. It's also a detail that I guess I wouldn't have come back to otherwise, just that Aang makes friends and talks about girls with the other prisoners at this little prison where he's at. That's kind of fun, having the big tough prisoners have a soft side, and Aang's natural charm winning them over. That's fun. But to have the Fire Nation people show up again, the ones that we see at the beginning, and have Aang and Katara and Sokka fight them off, that gives a real new thing for this village to appreciate. That they're not persuaded to change their opinion by facts of the story. They need a new story. And that's interesting, and I think there's a truth to that is not, it's not a good thing exactly, because so often in our real world, without getting too political about it, you have people for whom they have made a decision about how they feel about something, and telling them that they have incorrect facts at the basis of that feeling is not going to change their mind. You kind of need a new narrative, and that's difficult sometimes. And so Katara, Aang, and Sokka managed to get that narrative in this particular case. But I will also just finish with a note that it maybe is just a throwaway joke for everyone else, but when I first watched it, there's the bit in this episode where at the beginning, when they're running away from these rhino fire soldiers to begin with, and Katara goes back for her scrolls, and Aang goes back Aang goes back for his staff, but Sokka's boomerang is left behind. And Sokka is frustrated, and he's like, well, you guys went back for your stuff, but I don't get my boomerang, and he's feeling a little bit less than, also just like, well, I was the boomerang guy, and now I'm the ponytail guy, I guess, and having that bit. But then, for him to be reunited with the boomerang at the end and say, boomerang, you do always come back, is just one of my favorite jokes from the whole series. And I'm not going to tell anyone else that you should find it as funny and charming as I did, but boy, I sure do. Anyway, so that continues the story for this episode. We have them turn this little town around on their feelings about the Avatar by giving them a new story to believe, and in this case, one that's closer to reality. And as they continue on their way, they're making their way across this continent, the Earth Kingdom continent, headed for Ba Sing Se, still in need of an earthbending master. When will he get one? We'll have to see. So I'll be back next week with my continuation of Avatar: The Last Airbender rewatch, and I'll talk to you tomorrow for 5 more minutes.